Hello, friends. This is Doug Scheibel, and welcome to the Premature Bible Institute. I'm your free-range podcaster for Ethnos 360, and I'm really excited to talk to you about the lesson today. It's a pretty interesting one. We're getting pretty close to the New Testament now, so we're very, very grateful for it. And I think all that you've had up to this point is really leading up to some interesting conclusions that you're going to have that maybe you haven't really thought about it right out loud, but if you ask the question straight up, you'd know exactly what the answer would be. A lot of it has to do with because of what you've heard and all this foundational teaching you've heard up to this point. God had continued to provide for Israel as long as they realized that their only hope was for Him. God wanted to provide. He wanted to be a blessing to them. All they had to do was admit that they were sinners and that they had a need for a deliverer. And God wanted them to come to Him in the way that He had prescribed, and He would bless them just as He had promised that He would do. Throughout Scriptures, we see a lot of metaphors. I'm not talking about allegories. I'm talking about metaphors. They're true events, but they're pictures of something else at the same time as the event. So it has more than one meaning to it. It isn't that they're opposed to each other. They both have the same meaning, but it's like there's an event that happens, and then that also talks about something that's going to happen later on. But these pictures or these metaphors, God provided in order to help Israel to understand their need for a Savior, need for a deliverer. So today's lesson is going to be one of them, and I think it'll be kind of exciting and to talk about. Let's see how God and Israel handled this situation. So in the last lesson, we talked about how Israel blamed Moses and Aaron because they didn't have any water. Remember that? They didn't have any food or water, so they blamed Moses. And Moses and Aaron did what they should do. They went and they interceded for them to God. They went into the tabernacle, and it says they fell down on their face, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. So God commanded Moses to do something. He says, go to this rock, whichever one he pointed out. He says, and speak to the rock, and the water will come out and provide the Israelites with what they needed. Okay, so what does Moses do? He goes out, he starts chewing out the people, and then he strikes the rock twice with the rod, and water came out. So God provided the water like He promised He would, but Moses had disobeyed God. So Moses struck the rock twice. And as a result, the Lord judged Moses and Aaron, said they would not bring the Israelites into the promised land as He was going to do. Remember, they did this in front of the people, so the people saw that Moses was directly disobeying God. He showed disrespect to God by doing what he did. And so God made sure that not only did Moses and Aaron know that they had disrespected God, but so would all the people. And then later on we see the other event that Aaron passed away. God told him that he wouldn't go into the land. And remember, we talked last week, Moses didn't die because he disobeyed God. Moses died because he's a child of Adam. And that is the penalty for sin. All of us have that. So there are people aren't going to get out of that just because they're a good guy, a leader, or whatever. Everybody, kings, queens, peasants, average people, all of us die because we're children of Adam. So that's kind of a review of what happened last time. So let's continue on and see. Remember, I asked them the question, now after all this, do you think Israel has learned their lesson? Well, do you think they have? Do you think they've really learned their lesson now because of all this stuff, 40 years of being messed around and just all the things that they did? Let's see what they did. Especially since they learned on Moses and Aaron's judgment. Do you think they finally learned their lesson? Boy, if God's going to do that to Moses and Aaron, what's He going to do to us? And they say, okay, Lord, we want to agree with you. We want to obey you. You think that's what they did? Well, let's see. Numbers 21, verse 4 and 5. Then they journeyed from Mount Hor, which is where Aaron died, remember, by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. So while they were heading from where Aaron had died and were on their way to another place, on the way there it says they became very discouraged while they were on the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Notice, said both. And they said this, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. So remember, they had just left. They had just seen the water coming out of that rock, and they now, just leaving that place, they went to another place, and they complained about the very same thing. We hate this manna, and why isn't there any water? And why are you're just gonna let us die out here? So they're complaining against God again, and Moses at the same time. So how long did it take them to forget what the Lord had just done for them? Very little time. All it took was just a little bit. Were they satisfied with what the Lord provided for them up to this point? No, they weren't. They weren't even satisfied then. So would you and I be any different? Are we always satisfied with whatever God provides for us? Or do we have to say, I need more, I need more. If I just had this, I could be better off. If I could just have the right guitar, or if I just had the right car, or if I just had the right this or that, would I be able to? That's one of those things. You and I, do you think we'd be any different than they were? So how long is the Lord going to deal with this situation? So God decided to do something as a means of bringing them to Him. Let's put it that way. So let's read here in Numbers chapter 21, verse 6. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. So in other words, the Lord filled this land with snakes. I mean, they were coming after these guys right and left. I can't even imagine how many snakes there were. Can you imagine? I mean, most of you have seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or the first original Indiana Jones. And remember how he fell into down in that place where the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be, or that thing that showed where it was at, and is set down there, and they go into this place, and there he is with all those snakes, and how he hated snakes. Just imagine that. Just snakes everywhere. It's just amazing. So the people complain against Moses and God again. This time Aaron's not there, but they're still complaining. But this time it says against God and Moses. All right? So what does God do? He sends these poisonous snakes. They start biting the people. They start dying right and left. And there was no way to escape these serpents. They were coming. And I can't imagine anything more horrible than having these things, a bunch of them coming at you at the same time. I don't think anything could scare people more than that. So there are other examples of people who couldn't escape in the Old Testament. Were there? Adam and Eve didn't escape death. They couldn't escape it, could they? Cain couldn't escape. The world in Noah's time, they couldn't escape the flood. The Tower of Babel, the people couldn't escape God's judgment. Sodom and Gomorrah could not escape God's judgment either. Lot's wife couldn't even escape God's judgment. She left, but then she turned back and wanted to go back, and so God judged her. Israel was rejecting the contract that they had made with God. If you do what I tell you, I'll bless you. If you don't, I'll curse you. Remember, Israel, all that He says, we will do. So they're rejecting the contract that they had with God. But on the contrast, God is fulfilling the contract that He had made with Israel. So He says, you reject me, you're going to have problems. And they were. And so what do you think the Israelites did when they saw that God sent the fiery serpents and they started dying? What do you think they did? Do you think they just started running away? No, there was nowhere to run. They were going to die because they were in the middle of all these snakes. Maybe the snakes just surrounded them and just started coming in. We don't know. But there was so many, and people just started dying right and left. But verse 7 of chapter 21 says this, Therefore the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that He takes away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. So they admitted what they did. They said, We have sinned. All right? They're admitting it. For we have spoken against the Lord and against you. So they're admitting what they've done. They didn't beat around the bush. They didn't make excuses. They said, we've done this against the Lord and against you. And they asked us, pray to the Lord that He take away the serpents from us. So that's what they did. So Moses prayed for the people. And Moses did that. He had compassion on the people. But the people admitted what they did. Now, once again, God is obligated to keep His contract. If you do what I tell you, I'll bless you. If you don't, I'll curse you. All right, they didn't do what He said, therefore the curse was hitting them. But now they're doing what He said, and He's going to bless them. Let's see how. How He decided to do that. Numbers 21, verses 8 and 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole, and so it was. If a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. So here's the thing. God tells Moses, make this serpent made of bronze and put it on a pole. All right? And so they put that up on that pole. It says if a person who's been bitten looks at that serpent, they're going to live. But if they don't look at it, they're not going to live. All right? Now, this may have seemed weird to anybody else. I mean, to you and I, if somebody was in a bad car wreck and they say, okay, look at the hubcap of the other car and you'll live, that would seem dumb to us. But that may have seemed just about as bad here. It says, make something. The thing that's killing us, make something that looks like that, put it on a pole, made of bronze, and if people look at that who have been bitten, they're going to live. All right? So it may have seemed weird, but God had a purpose in this, in doing this. He told them that if those bitten looked at the bronze serpent, they would live. All right? If they did not look at the serpent, they died. They would die. So it was a matter of faith, wasn't it? Those who did not look at the serpent probably thought that this was a stupid thing to do. Well, why? Look at a serpent, how's that going to help me? Then they ended up dying. Those who looked at it believed that this was their only hope. That's something to remember. The people that looked at this bronze serpent were saying to God, this is the only hope I've got, what you've provided for me. So they were looking at what God provided for them as the only hope they had. They couldn't look at anything else. They couldn't look to Moses. They couldn't look to anything. But that bronze serpent on a pole, God says, look at it, you'll die. Now I want you to understand a couple other things too that may seem a little bit odd to you, but this is really, really important. Things that may seem weird to the average person. Throughout the Old Testament, these things might seem weird to you, such as all people were to bring the appropriate sacrifice. We see that with Cain and Abel. After the flood with Noah, everybody was supposed to bring the appropriate sacrifice. That may seem weird. Not any sacrifice they wanted, People weren't sitting there saying, I've got all these talents and abilities, I'm going to give that to the Lord. He doesn't want your talent and abilities. He's already got them. What he wants you to do is come to him in the way that he provides. All right? When he told those people to get into a large boat when it had never rained before, that may have seemed weird to everybody. Obviously it did, or a lot more people than 8 would have got on that boat. Leave the comforts of home and go to a land you have never been before, such as he told to Abraham. That may seem weird. In modern day, missionaries, that's what they do, a lot of them. I have a lot of friends whose parents and friends of theirs tell them, hey, that's the dumbest thing. Don't leave the comforts of home to go to a land you've never been before or even seen. But that's what they do. Why? Because they believe the Lord. Put blood on the doorpost. That's what you need to do. If you just put blood on the doorposts and on the lintel, the upper part of the doorpost, you won't die, but all the firstborn of everybody else will. That may have seemed like a dumb thing to do. Walk through the Red Sea may have seemed like a dumb thing for people to do. God says do it. That was the only provision God gave to the Israelites to escape the Egyptians. All right? And strike and speak to a rock to get water. That first time Moses talked to, or God was dealing with the water thing, God told Moses to strike the rock one time. Okay? That will have significance later on. The second time they did it, he told them to speak to the rock. Don't strike it again. Speak to the rock. But Moses struck it twice. The water came, but at a great cost. Moses and Aaron could not enter into the promised land. So did these people they rebelled against God again just so soon after the other time, did they deserve God's mercy and kindness? No, they didn't. God provided because he keeps his promises. God always does what he says he's going to do. That's the thing to remember. God desires that all will come to him, admitting that they are sinners and they trust in his provision to save them. That's what he wants all of us to do. The serpent, that bronze serpent, never had any power to save people. It was just a bronze serpent. that God told them to put up there. It was for people to realize that God was the only hope that they had, the only option. There was no other point. But they did the right thing. They didn't say, Moses, erect a serpent up on this pole. It says, we have sinned against the Lord and against you. Please ask him to take these serpents away from us. See, that was their thought. Maybe God will take the serpents away. But God knew that those people would die. Even though the serpents left, the ones that had been bitten would still die. So what God did probably, I think, was the serpents left. But all the people who had been bitten already, he says, look at that serpent and they'll live. All right? Maybe there was pain involved in that, but they would live. By obeying him, they were saved. By disobeying him, they died. Okay? So that was the main thing. People think that if they do or not do the right things, God will accept them. Let me say, people think that if they do the right things or they do not do the wrong things, God will accept them. And what I mean by that is, I just want you to think about this, what God told the people to do. All he told them to do was look at the serpent. He didn't tell them, hey, you need to get your life right. You need to quit smoking, quit drinking, quit carousing, quit drugs, quit being the kind of person you ought to be. Believe me, and you'll be saved from this event. You'll be delivered from it. And they did. So the ones that were bitten did that. But see, a lot of times that's what we think. In order to please God, we think we have to do all the right things. The point is, we need to believe God. That's what we need to do. We need to believe that he's telling the truth and that he means what he says. See, it isn't a matter of me how I can change my life, because I can't. I'm still a child of Adam. Even though I'm a child of God as a believer, I'm one of his children, but still that old nature is still stuck in me, but I don't have to serve it anymore. But we'll talk about that at another time. By obeying him, they were saved. By disobeying him, they would die. So, people think if they quit doing, like I say, all these different things, that God's going to accept them. No, that isn't like that. And you'll find out later on. The only thing people had to do in the time of Noah was get on the ark. They didn't have to quit all their stuff. God says, get on the ark, and you'll be delivered from the destruction. And that's all it was throughout all the Old Testament. And in this case, too, very same thing. If you do what I tell you, you'll be delivered. But if not, you're going to die. God only required that they look at the bronze serpent. The bronze serpent had no power to save them, just like all the Old Testament sacrifices had no power to save them. All they did was withhold God from judging them at that particular time until the proper sacrifice could come, the deliverer. So God was not interested in what people could do for him. All right? He was interested in what people saw him doing for them. That's what he wanted them to see. He wanted them to say, wow, look what God has done for us. We deserve punishment, yet he gives us mercy. He delivers us from all these problems, these situations. And that's what God wanted them to do. God would keep his word no matter what people would do. So even though people broke their contract, God would never break his own contract. It was his contract. God's only requirement, believe him. That's what faith is all about. I always say this, faith is not believing that God can do the impossible. Faith is believing that God can do just what he said he would do. And if he said he would deliver the people, if those bitten looked at this bronze serpent, you can bet that he would. All right? So next week we're going to continue on. It won't be too much longer, like I say, till we get to the New Testament. If you have any friends that want to listen to this, have them get on their favorite podcast and look up the Premature Bible Institute. And if they want to watch it on YouTube, just have them get on YouTube and look up for my name, Doug, not underscore, just Doug space Scheibel. And Schaible is my last name. Take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.